I grew up in the Air Force. I'm an Air Force brat. And I first came to Nebraska when my dad was transferred to Offutt Air Force Base in Bellevue to what was then the Strategic Air Command. I went to high school in Papillion and college here in Lincoln and majored in journalism. My first job was out in western Nebraska at a station that had an office in Scottsbluff, and the main station was up in Hay Springs, which is, if you don't know, it's outside of Chadron. It's about, I think, 20 miles outside of Chadron. And I did everything up there. I did news, weather, sports, operated a camera, reported, did everything there. From there I moved to West Virginia. I met my husband there. He's from Detroit. And we came back to Omaha in 1981 and worked at Channel 7 there for about 14 years. Now I am a full-time author. It's great. I get to stay at home. I get to write. I get to make up my own little worlds. I can pick my kids up after school. They don't have to go to daycare after school, which is wonderful. Although there are a lot of days when I think we're together maybe too much. And it's nice being at home. I've never been at home. Never since I graduated from college. I've always had a job outside of my home. And I thought it was going to be wonderfully organized and write lots of books, and my house would be clean and dinner would be on the table. And essentially nothing is any different. The last thing to be done in my house is the house to be cleaned, and that's usually only when people are coming. But I enjoy it. I really like it. Romance has a stereotype that we are always trying to fight our way through. I find once people, women or men, pick up a romance being written today, they're shocked by the fact that it's good, it's well written, it's interesting, and it goes beyond a simple relationship. Because of that stereotype, you get comments from the media, but the people I worked with, other reporters, they were just thrilled that I had actually written a book and then sold it. Obviously my family, I mean, my husband's been incredibly supportive. You know, when we started talking about my quitting a very good job with a very good salary and taking on an entire new career, building it from scratch, you know, he was willing to do that, which is still kind of amazing to me. My father's been very supportive, even though with my first book, well, there are love scenes in romance novels. And I wanted his opinion because he's a voracious reader. But I didn't want him to know that I knew these things. Because I'm convinced, even though I have 2 kids, he doesn't think, you know, that I know anything about sex. He pulled my husband aside after I had him read the book, and he said, "Why didn't you want me to read the book?" And my husband said, "Well, I think it was the sex." And he said, "Well, I didn't think it was that much." So that was a nice relief, but we've never actually discussed that. Nebraska is a very well-kept secret. I have friends who come, and they go, "Well, we didn't think it was at all like this." Well, no, and we're not going to tell you. There's a wonderful sense of freedom and independence here. I enjoy living here. I like traveling other places, and I like traveling other places in my books and in my stories, but I enjoy living here. This is a good place to live. It's got a very, as I said, an independent spirit, and I think that has a lot to do with the plains and has a lot to do with how the area developed. You can still drive for miles and miles in Nebraska and not see anything. And on one hand, you know, you might go, "Ooh, there's nothing." On the other hand, it's wonderful. The second job I had was in West Virginia. So I went from western Nebraska to West Virginia. And everywhere in West Virginia, there are towns that have a little creek through the middle, and then houses, and then mountains go straight up. And it was very nice, but whenever I would drive west and I'd get out of those mountains and the landscape would open up, it was like you could breathe again. And I think that's one of the things. I think that's got to influence your writing. Just that sense of freedom and that sense of that almost anything is possible out here, because the land and the sky, it stretches forever. I've gone through an evolution in my reading tastes, and I think I've been influenced by all of it. I went through a period in high school and college where almost all I read was science fiction. And I went through a period where I was primarily reading mysteries. I read all of Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot's, and I have them all, and I just love them. I think he's a wonderful detective. I read a lot of popular fiction too, adventure, I think, more than anything else. When I look at, and I get asked this, I think all writers do and readers do, you know, what books have influenced you or what are your favorite books? The ones that come to mind immediately are the Chronicles of Narnia, which I discovered when I was in the 5th grade and somebody did a book report on one of them. And at that time you couldn't buy them in the United States. A few years later we were in Canada, and my family has always been one, when we're shopping and there's a bookstore, we stop in it. And I found some of the other books and bought some of those. It wasn't until I was in college that I actually read all the rest of them, so I'd read them as I found them. I think that has influenced me. Another one is Gone with the Wind, that I read when I was in high school. And I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful story, and it's got a heroine that you just want to smack. I mean, she is just, you know, this is not good, sweet, pure. This is a woman who knows what she wants and is going to do whatever she can to get it, which is not necessarily a good thing in real life, but in a fictional heroine, that's not a bad way to be. Research is great fun, and you can get absolutely lost in it if you don't watch yourself. Trying to get in things in a story that sound like research. You know, you can read a line that somebody's written, usually people who are just starting out, and you know this line is in there because this is a piece of information they found out and they want to get it in there. I think the best way to research, there are a couple ways. When you're researching a period like the Regency, there are reference books that detail things like the manners and the social customs and the mores. That's a good way to do it. Another good way to do it is to read what other people are writing in that time period. And then another way, and this is a tough one, is to read things that were written then. I decided a couple years ago that since I was enjoying historical romance so much and the Regency, that I should read Jane Austen. Well, I am an incredibly fast reader. I can read a 400-page book in a day easily. I read very quickly. Jane Austen, it was Pride and Prejudice. It took me 3 weeks just to get into it, the cadence of the speech and the language, and it's a much more formal language than we're used to speaking. But it's great because it gives you a real feel for how people were thinking then. Another thing that's wonderful is good movies. I mean, movies that are well researched. I will watch movies on TV now. I've gotten so much into, I never liked history in school. Never liked it at all. Now I love it. I absolutely love it. And I will watch movies and I will look at something like the costume and go, excuse me, if this is supposed to be 1860, she's not going to be wearing that. And it drives people that I'm with crazy. But I will notice those things. And but good movies are wonderful because, again, you can see people interacting with each other wearing, you know, the huge hoop skirts, if you're talking about, you know, 1860s or whatever, and that's great fun. I also, I jump from period to period, which is stupid. I should just concentrate on one. Regency is my favorite, which is about around 1800, 1820. I also have done a couple of things in Victorian times, which I find kind of easy because, I mean, I have Victorian furniture. You know, Victorian stuff is pretty easy to come by. The one that comes out this summer is kind of a fantasy set in a medieval period. And I like that time period. I like the Middle Ages. And I started doing a lot of research on it because I wanted to set a book there and realized this is such a different world. You have to be familiar with your setting before you can put a character there. I couldn't do it. I mean, it was like another world. The story that I did is a time travel where my heroine is contemporary, so she can look around at the Middle Ages and go, oh, yuck. You know, she can react like I would react.
We don't often think of romance writing as writing representative of what can be done by Nebraskans, but it's long been my opinion that reading only things written by Nebraskans, we can become completely educated and also completely entertained. So, of course, romance writing also fits the bill. A year ago, I was asked to speak on books about love. I don't know anything about books about love, so I did some research here in the room, and I found that we had over 20 novelists that do write on love stories. So on your way out tonight, you might want to look up this book list. It's called Love Nebraska Style, that we put together, listing out many of the romance and love writers that we've got in the state of Nebraska. Tonight, I'd like to introduce Victoria Alexander, the author of 8 works, including Yesterday and Forever, The Princess and the Pea, the novella that's included in this work, The Night Before Christmas. What's the title of that novella?
Promises to Keep.
Promises to Keep, indeed. The Emperor's New Clothes, and also a book called Play It Again, Sam, a portion of which she'll be reading tonight, and also a forthcoming work entitled Believe. So I'd like to introduce Victoria Alexander.
I should explain, Play It Again, Sam is a reincarnation story, with the first half set in 1818 and the second half in contemporary times. And it's narrated by a dog, a bearded collie. This is what a beardy looks like. He's a little tiny here. If you watch the Westminster Dog Show, he was in the herding group. And they described him, the announcer described him as an escape artist, which I know firsthand now. After I wrote the book, I thought this would be such a great family dog that we found a local breeder, and we ended up getting a beardy. So I have my own Sam now, and he just turned a year old last week. And he is 42 pounds and can put his, which is small for a beardy actually, and can put his, stands on his hind legs and will put his paws on your shoulders and give you hugs. And it's like having a child in a dog suit. That's exactly how he acts. So the first part of this, leading into the first chapter, is in Sam's point of view. So I'll start there. A bug is a bug is a bug, period. I don't care what anybody tells you, kid. If you were a bug in the last life, you're going to be a bug in the next. Oh, you might be a butterfly or you might be a roach, but you're still going to be a bug. It's as simple as that. Yeah, I know all the talk about this reincarnation business. I know they say if you were good in one life, you'll come back as something better. That story's been going around forever, probably started by some optimist on the bottom of the food chain. Well, take it from me, kid, it's all garbage. Here's how it really works. I'm a dog now, and I've always been a dog. Sometimes I get to be a really swell mutt or even a purebred, but I've also lived out whole, entire lives in the streets. I'm telling you, you don't want to do that. Boy, that's tough, scrounging for food, fighting with rats. Gives me shivers just to talk about it. Nah, to live the good life, you gotta be a blue blood, a pampered pooch. Now that's living. I remember once I was a poodle. What a way to go, aside from that stupid haircut. What? Sorry, kid, what was I saying? Oh yeah, reincarnation. You're just a pup, but think for a minute. Do you remember any other lives? No? Good for you. You're free and clear for this go-round. No worries, no problems, no sweat. What do I mean? It's kind of a quirk about this whole past lives thing. If you don't remember nothing, it means you don't have nothing important to do this time around. It ain't easy to explain. There are rules, see? Take humans, for example. They never remember other lives, even though they keep running into the same people life after life after life. Now, your animals don't remember unless they got a mission, a purpose, something they just got to do. Cats are the exception. Damn cats always remember past lives. That's where that saying about them having 9 lives comes from. They got more than 9. We all got more than 9. They just remember, and they've got long memories. Let me give you a little warning about cats, kid. Don't ever piss one off. They'll always get you back. If not in this life, then in the next. Yeah, I got a mission this time. I'd say I've been a well-behaved little mutt to come back like this. Here, I'll stand up so you can get a good look. What do you think? Pretty swell, eh? Not too big, not too small, great coat. Somebody in the park the other day called me a dust mop. What a jerk. I tried to give him a withering look, but in this breed the best you can hope for is a less than enthusiastic grin. It's okay, though. I left him a little present where he'd least expect it. Sheepdog? You got it all wrong, kid. I'm a bearded collie. They call me a beardy. It's a good breed, smart, quick, and cute. I'm damn near irresistible. It's the same breed I was last time when all this started back nearly 200 years ago. That's people years, you know. In dog years, it'd be, never mind. Anyway, that's where this mission of mine began. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. I don't know, it's a long story. Sure you want to hear it? Okay, let me just get settled down here. There, that's better. Now, pass me the milk bones, kid, and keep 'em coming. To start with, back then they called me Samuel, but you can call me Sam. Chapter 1, Spring, 1818. Samuel, Samuel, come back here, you silly creature. Philippa Morgan laughed and raced after the shaggy canine who cavorted amidst the rolling hills of Sussex as if he hadn't a care in the world. And no doubt the furry beast hadn't. He was not a dog given to bouts of melancholy. Where did the creature go? Caroline Linden planted her hands on her hips and glared at her cousin. Gracious, Pippa, the way you let that dog do exactly what he pleases, one would think you were the pet and he the master. Don't tell anyone, Caro. Pippa leaned closer in a confidential manner. Samuel thinks so, too. For goodness sakes, Caro sank down onto the grassy hillside and glared at her. It's high time you put aside catering to that scruffy animal and concentrated on the important things in life. He's not scruffy. As usual, Caro ignored her, far too caught up in her own excitement to pay any heed to anyone else. Her brown eyes flashed with eagerness. Only 2 days left, Pippa. Just think of it. Pippa collapsed onto the grass beside her and smiled weakly. I am thinking of it. A London season, finally. It feels as if we have waited forever for this. Forever. A sensation akin to an illness brought on by damp weather fluttered in Pippa's stomach. We shall have such fun, all the parties and balls and routs. Caro stared dreamily off in the distance, as if she could see the joys of London somewhere just beyond the horizon. It will be glorious. Do you really think so? Of course I do, you silly goose. It's our very first season, and we shall simply have the best time. There's Almack's and the presentation at court, and of course our own come-out ball and, well, everything. Caro grinned. I think these will be the most exciting months of our entire lives. I'm sure they will, still and all. Pippa wrinkled her nose. Don't you find it a bit overwhelming? Certainly not. We've had lessons in dance and deportment. We know exactly what is expected of a young lady in society, what we are permitted to do and what is forbidden. Caro nodded confidently. We are most definitely ready. I suspect we are. Pippa forced all the enthusiasm she could muster to her voice. Caro eyed her with exasperation. I still do not understand why you are the least bit nervous about this. I don't either, not really. Pippa plucked at bits of grass clinging here and there to her skirts. I suppose I'd much rather ease my way into society than be thrust upon it all at once. It simply seems impossible to be able to remember everything. All the rules and, well, to be completely honest, I simply cannot for the life of me remember what one is supposed to call the second son of a cousin of a duke once removed. She widened her eyes innocently. Why, you call him, Caro glared. Pippa, stop it right now. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. Pippa laughed, and a reluctant smile quirked Caro's lips. I do apologize. I shouldn't tease. To make up for it, I'll tell you my secret. Secret? Caro leaned forward eagerly. What secret? Well, Pippa cast her gaze from side to side and lowered her voice to a whisper. I must admit, somewhere deep inside, I am looking forward to this too, at least a little. Caro whooped in a manner no lesson in deportment ever taught. I suspected as much. She threw her arms around Pippa and gave her a quick hug. I am so glad. We shall have such a marvelous time together. Caro grinned and her dimples deepened. And the gentlemen, Pippa, just think of the gentlemen. Pippa shuddered. I have no need to think of them. All of them looking for wives. Caro sighed in anticipation. I want one that's handsome, of course, with a sizable income. Oh, $20,000 a year at the minimum, I should think. Why not 30 or 50? Caro nodded, her dark curls bobbing around her head. I shouldn't want to be greedy, although 50 would be nice, and a good respectable title, at least an earl. Why not a marquess or a duke, perhaps? Indeed, a duke. Caro slanted her an accusing glance. You're bamming me again, aren't you? Just a bit. Pippa laughed, and a moment later Caro joined in. Joke about it all you want, but we both know the only reason for a season at all is to find a good match. I dare say you won't have any trouble. I suspect you'll be declared an incomparable, a diamond of the first water, and will have your choice of anyone. Oh, Pippa, don't be silly. Caro paused as if considering her cousin's words. Do you really think so? I have no doubt whatsoever. Confidence rang in Pippa's voice. Caro would indeed make her mark on society. Her looks alone would assure attention. Tall, with dark eyes and darker hair, the girl had a ripening figure that showed to full advantage in the low-cut, high-waisted fashion of the day. I suspect we both will, Caro said stoutly. Dearest, no one would possibly look at me with you around. The cousins did bear a certain resemblance in the shape of their eyes and tilt of their noses, but there the similarity ended, thanks to mothers choosing husbands at opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of appearance, although the fathers of both girls did share a common genial disposition. Nonsense. In point of fact, I believe together we will make an impact. With your fair coloring and my dark, we shall draw the attention of every man in London. Perhaps you will. No, Pippa, we will. Caro studied her with an assessing eye. Your hair is that lovely white gold color, your features are regular and really rather pert, and your eyes are the most remarkable shade of green. I think you're being kind. I know it's fashionable, but I've always felt far too pale to be truly attractive. I suspect I shall be rather more vivid as a ghost walking the halls of the manor than I am as a solid living being. Pippa heaved a heavy sigh. Next to you, Caro, I am a watercolor faded in the sun beside a brightly painted portrait. Caro laughed. Don't be absurd. You're really quite charming, and I've always suspected men adore women who are as dainty and petite as you are. I'm not dainty and petite. I'm short and thin. Pippa cast a rueful glance downward, then looked at her cousin's well-filled dress and grimaced. Very well, petite. Caro rolled her eyes in resignation, wrapped her arms around her knees, and gazed out over the countryside. Pippa released a relieved breath. The question of appearance was an ongoing debate between the cousins, and while she truly appreciated Caro's encouraging comments, she could not take them to heart. Oh, she did not believe herself to be completely unattractive, but in a very realistic sense knew without question she could not compare to Caro. Still, it scarcely mattered anymore. Pippa, Caro's gaze still focused on a far-off point. Her voice was a shade too casual, and Pippa's heart sank. Appearance wasn't the only continuing discussion between the two. Have you spoken with Hugh recently? A few days ago. Have you, perhaps, reconsidered your decision? No. Caro turned, her gaze met and locked with Pippa's. Why not? I see no need to change my mind. Pippa clenched her jaw. Hugh Winston will be an excellent husband. I'm certain he will, but his family's estate borders our own. I have known Hugh all of my life. My parents, as well as his, have wanted this match nearly from the day I was born. They never said anything, but I believe they actually expected it. Besides, Hugh is his father's only heir. He will one day be the Earl of Winsley. She nudged Caro and grinned. An Earl, Caro, and I shall be a countess. Isn't a respectable title one of the requirements you're looking for in a husband? I want more than that, and you well know it. Caro pressed her lips together in a firm line, and you should too. No one is forcing me to marry Hugh. I may have been prodded a bit in his direction, but this is entirely my decision, mine and his. Caro, please listen to me. I do so want to make you understand. She cast her a pleading look. In a very practical sense, everyone benefits from such a match. Eventually, it means our properties will be merged, our wealth combined, our two families joined. It's very nearly perfect. But you don't love him. I did not notice love on the list of items you wished for in a husband, and I do love Hugh. As a brother, perhaps, or a friend, and no doubt with luck and time it will grow to be much more. Pippa wrapped her arms around herself and stared out across the hills. We already have a certain amount of affection between us. I was quite fond of him before he went off to school, and you were a mere child. Even though he has lived these past years more in London than here, the sentiment remains. Many couples do not share even that much, and you must admit he is a handsome man. But he doesn't make your heart race and your mouth dry and your hands tremble. He doesn't make you feel as if you could not bear to draw another breath on this earth unless he was with you. He doesn't make you want to sacrifice your very life to save his. Caro's eyes shone with the intensity of her words. Don't you want a man who will make you feel all that? Pippa stared for a long moment, unable or unwilling to answer. A myriad of responses whirled in her head, and an odd pain stabbed her at the thought of never knowing a love so deep you would surely die with it and gladly die for it. She drew a steadying breath. I want Hugh. We shall have a good life together. Caro's voice softened. It sounds very much as if you are not trying to convince me as much as yourself. No, Caro, I am quite satisfied with my choice. This marriage is right for all concerned. Caro looked as if she was about to say something more, but thought better of it. She shrugged. Well, at least your betrothal will not be announced until the end of the season. We shall still have London together. Pippa smiled, relieved at the change of subject. And we will have a wonderful time. I even promised to throw myself into the spirit of each and every festivity and enjoy myself. The soirees, the balls, the routs, Caro raised a brow. Everything? Everything. You have my word on it. And do I also have your word that if a handsome stranger sweeps you off your feet and offers you undying love, you shall not cast him aside without due consideration? Caro, annoyance pulled her brows together. I am sorry. I shall try not to bring it up again. She scrambled to her feet. I suspect someone at the manor will be wondering where we are, although between my mother and yours there is scarcely any necessity for us. Pippa laughed. They do seem to be intent on packing everything we could ever possibly require during our stay in town. We shall no doubt need a fleet of carriages to move the household items alone. Caro shaded her eyes and scanned the countryside. Where do you suppose that animal of yours has gotten himself to? He'll be back, Pippa said with a nod. Samuel always comes back. He really is a very good dog, you know. Caro snorted. He's a big mangy beast. I simply cannot believe you're bringing him with us to London. Samuel will love London. But will London love Samuel? Everyone loves Samuel, Pippa grinned, except you. I, too, would love him if he'd refrain from leaping all over me with wet, sloppy abandon. He adores you. That type of adoration I can well do without, thank you. Pippa laughed. "Why don't you go ahead? I'll find Samuel and I shall be home soon." "Very well." Caro turned and started toward the manor, hidden behind the rolling hills and meadows. She tossed a casual wave behind her and strode off. "Samuel," Pippa got to her feet, her gaze skimming the area. "Samuel." Let's see, when last spotted, Samuel was headed in the direction opposite to that taken by Caro. She nodded to herself and started off after him. Surely she would catch up to him soon. Samuel, where had the creature disappeared to? One thing she could always depend on was Samuel's return. He was a very good dog, after all, if perhaps a bit overspirited. The same could be said for Caro as well. Pippa grinned at the thought of Caro's reaction to being compared to the dog. Still, it was an accurate comparison. Why, hadn't Pippa heard her own father say the very same thing? "Yes, I've no doubt Caro will make a good match," Lord Morgan, Viscount Morgan, had said. "She is a bit overspirited, but marriage will settle her down." Pippa sighed. She did so wish to have just a bit of Caro's excess spirit. Pippa could best be described as, well, good. "As her father, frankly, I'm quite relieved Pippa does not share her cousin's temperament," Papa had said. "Pippa is a good girl, never a problem with that one. Why, she'll make an excellent biddable wife." Good. The word alone was enough to make her shudder, though she admitted it only to herself. Good girls lived pleasant but somewhat boring lives. Good girls made good matches with affectionate, if rather dull, husbands. Good girls did precisely what was expected of them, never once experienced the thrill of the unknown, married earls, and became countesses. Overspirited girls teased the thin edge of ruin and had all the wrong kinds of men dropping at their feet, with passionate promises on their lips and desire burning in their eyes. Overspirited girls shared kisses with men they had no intention of marrying, and overspirited girls lived fast-paced lives full of slightly dangerous adventures and even a touch of scandal. And often they, too, became countesses. Caro would have such a life. Pippa was a good, biddable girl and was to marry Hugh, exactly as expected. Samuel, the sharp tone in her voice surprised her, and she realized it had nothing to do with the dog. Did she indeed regret her decision? No, of course not. Hugh would make an excellent husband. Besides, the season did not come with a guarantee. There were no certainties of making a match at all, let alone one as good as hers and Hugh's, and there were no promises of love. Still, wouldn't it be exciting to feel all those things for a man that Caro talked about, the kind of man she knew only in her dreams late into the night, when she slept a sleep so deep she shed all weight of goodness and danced beneath the stars, clad in little more than a whisper, held tight in the arms of a faceless, mysterious true love. Dreams so intense that she'd wake with her heart pounding and her flesh still warm from the heat of his body next to hers, and a yearning ache so strong she marveled that she could bear the pain of it, and lay for long hours in the dark, wondering if she was indeed good or simply scared. What would it be like just once not to be good or biddable, to be the kind of girl who teased the thin edge of ruin, to be wide awake and bold and willing to taste it just for a moment, the sinful delights given only to those with the courage to defy convention and flirt with scandal? Would it be so terribly wrong just once? Abruptly, the sound of padded paws and rustling grass jerked her from her odd reverie, and she turned just in time to see a ball of fur barrel toward her. Samuel. Pippa grinned at the sheer exuberance of the dog. Caro was right. He could be overwhelming. "What have you been up to?" The dog grinned and flung himself at her. "Samuel." Pippa thrust out her hands to halt his forward lunge, but the animal slammed into her with an unexpected force, knocking her from her feet. Pippa's hands flailed at her sides in a desperate attempt to stop her haphazard tumble down the hill that was far less gentle from this position than she had always assumed when her feet were planted firmly on its slope. The dog yipped and gambled about her toppling form as if this was yet another game for mistress and beast. Grass ripped through her fingers, and she struggled to grab hold of anything that could halt her out-of-control spill, until finally she rolled to a shuddering stop. Pippa lay on the ground, her heart thudding, gasping to catch her breath. She stared upward, stunned. Goodness, was she hurt? Had she suffered a serious injury? At once, Samuel's face filled her vision. Just inches from her own, the dog's expression appeared both troubled and quizzical, as if he wondered if this was play or something for concern. "Now, see what you've done, you naughty creature." She groaned and glared at the unrepentant animal. "I suspect I shall be extremely sore for the next few days." Samuel smiled down at her. "Are you quite certain you're not hurt?" "Samuel?" Pippa's eyes widened in disbelief, then she quickly squeezed them closed tight. Perhaps she had suffered some harm after all to believe Samuel had acquired the gift of speech. Had she smacked her head in her fall and failed to note the severity of the blow? Was she now faced with the horrible prospect of losing her faculties altogether? Still, in a practical sense, a talking dog would make madness a bit easier to endure. Odd, though, she'd never imagined Samuel to have a voice quite so resonant and rich. "Do you need assistance?" Pippa clenched her fists. No doubt the way to face insanity was head on. She swallowed hard and cautiously opened her eyes. Samuel's shaggy head was gone, replaced by the face of a stranger. He bent beside her, brows furrowed with concern, lips pressed together in a worried line, anxiety coloring eyes as deep and dark as the skies before a storm. "Samuel? Samuel?" The man's frown deepened. "I fear you are somewhat confused. There is no one here but you and I and this furry canine. You are not Samuel." "Who is Samuel?" "Samuel is my dog." The stranger raised a cautious brow. "You believed your dog to be inquiring about your condition?" She struggled to prop herself up on her elbows. Indignation colored her words. "He is an extremely thoughtful dog." For a moment, Pippa glared at this intruder who had the nerve to question the character of her animal, and abruptly realized how very ridiculous the entire discussion was. She bit back a giggle, and a roguish smile quirked the corners of the man's lips. "I did not mean to insult the beast. I am certain he is not only thoughtful, but also good-natured and obedient." The smile grew into a grin, and no doubt a charming conversationalist as well. Pippa laughed. "Well, he is quite prone to discussions of a governmental nature, the current debates in Parliament, policies of the Foreign Ministry, that sort of thing." "I see." His words were solemn, but a twinkle shone in his eye. "He is a political pup, then. Is he a conservative canine as well?" "I haven't the faintest idea." She shook her head in a serious manner. "He is surprisingly reluctant to discuss specifics regarding his own views." She leaned toward him confidentially. "I suspect he fears offending those who might be a potential source of treats someday, purveyors of bones and such." The stranger laughed, a warm, wonderful sound that seemed to reach inside her to touch her soul. "What a clever creature." He rose to his feet. "And as for you," he reached out his hand, "I cannot guarantee the same stimulating discussion as your Samuel, but may I offer you some assistance?" "Thank you." She kept her voice prim and placed her hand in his. He pulled her upright in a smooth, swift movement. "I dare say you—" Without warning, Samuel leapt at her as if to welcome her back to her feet, and she stumbled against her rescuer. He caught her easily in arms hard and strong. "There now." He smiled down at her. Goodness, the man was certainly much taller than she'd expected. Her heart skipped a beat at the proximity of his body to hers. How could she have failed to note the striking features of his handsome face? His chin was square and strong, his nose straight and noble, his lips full and firm, and his stormy eyes were filled with humor and light. His hair was the color of night and cut in the first stare of fashion. His clothes, too, were the epitome of well-dressed. He was obviously a gentleman. Abruptly, she regretted the serviceable but worn day dress she had tossed on this morning. "Are you quite all right?" She stared at him, her gaze meshing with his. She had never been held like this by a man before. Even Hugh had not dared take such liberties. She should step out of his embrace now, immediately at once, but somehow couldn't seem to move. It was as if she was mesmerized by his nearness, bewitched by the subtle but heady scent of man and heat, captivated by a vague but compelling promise of something as yet unknown, and trapped as well by a strange sense of comfort and peace. Had she hit her head harder than she thought, or was this yet another dream? He pulled his brows together, as if he knew the wellspring of emotions his touch aroused, as if he too shared her confusion. "Yes, she swallowed hard. I'm fine, really." "Really?" His gaze searched her face, settling on her lips. Her breath caught. Surely he wouldn't kiss her. They had scarce met. She did not know his name. It was extremely improper, scandalous, in fact. He was no doubt a scoundrel of the worst sort to even consider taking such license. And yet, in the back of her mind, a voice whispered, "Just once." A recklessness she'd never known before seized her. Was it possible, given her thoughts before his appearance, that their meeting was no mere coincidence? Could this indeed be the hand of fate or destiny? Again a whisper, "Just once." She sighed up at him with a mad, undisguised longing she never dreamed existed. "Really?" "You are quite lovely, you know." "Am I?" She shouldn't encourage him. It was not too late to stop. "Indeed you are. Your hair," he brushed an errant curl away from her face, and her knees weakened at his touch, "is the color of summer itself." The thought lingered. Just once. "Are you a rake, sir?" She trembled at her bold words, shocked and excited. He laughed. "In some circles I suppose I have been called that, and you, my dear, are delightful." Then she swallowed hard. "Then perhaps you should wish to kiss me." Now it was definitely too late. His eyes widened slightly as if surprised by her innocent eagerness. Then he dipped his head toward hers. "I should like nothing better." "Just once," she whispered. "Just once." The words skimmed along her lips in a touch so light, she wondered if she would swoon from the teasing brush of his mouth on hers. Her hands crept around his neck, and he pulled her close. His kiss deepened, her breath mingled with his, and she wanted to melt against him and lose herself in his embrace. In a far corner of her mind, not fogged by remarkable and newly discovered sensations, she marveled at odd stirrings the stranger triggered within her, stirrings at once welcoming and forbidding, stirrings even the touch of the man she was to wed did not arouse. Why, Hugh's polite kisses were not nearly so stimulating. Oh my, she pulled back and stared wide-eyed at the man whose bemused expression no doubt matched her own. I have never done anything like this before. It's quite improper, you know. He heaved a deep sigh of regret. Yes, indeed, I have known that from the beginning. He quirked a slightly lopsided smile. I simply hoped you didn't. I do. I don't know what came over me. I don't know why I failed to remember. A sense of yearning and familiarity so intense swept through her, and she struggled with the strength of it. Perhaps, she couldn't quite seem to catch her breath. Perhaps since we are both agreed as to the impropriety of, well, this, you should, release me. Of course, thoughtless of me not to have realized that myself. Did he hesitate before opening his arms? For just the barest second, did he appear reluctant to let her go? Was there a light of regret in his eyes? No, of course not. And surely she did not experience a strange sense of abandonment when he unwrapped his arms from around her. She stepped back, at once at a loss for words. What did one say to a handsome stranger who had literally swept you into his arms and kissed you as you had never been kissed before, and at your invitation, no less? Heat swept up her face. How could she have been so over-spirited? Beautiful day, is it not? The words blurted from her lips. Beautiful day? Surely she did not comment on the weather. Indeed, he nodded firmly as if the weather was of extreme interest. It is a fine spring day. Oh yes, springtime in England is always quite, fine, she groaned to herself. Springtime is fine. What a goose he'd think her. And not just any goose, but a wanton goose. With any luck, a huge fissure would open up beneath her feet and she would sink far out of sight of spring in England and all its glories. Oh, especially in England. Teasing laughter sparkled in his eye. Chagrin turned to irritation. What a vexing man he was. Here she struggled to overcome mortification brought on by her scandalous behavior, and he thought it amusing. Yes, well, indeed. Why couldn't she even get one intelligent word out? There were scores of things she could ask him, indeed things she should ask him. Who he was, where he was from, was he staying at a nearby estate, or had he moved to the neighborhood? Did they share mutual acquaintances, friends, interests? Did he have a dog? Once again, heat flushed her cheeks at the thought of one interest she already suspected they shared. The dog seems to like it. He nodded toward Samuel, who studied them from a distance. The animal appeared pensive, as if trying to decide if he did indeed like what he saw or not. Well, it was certainly too late for that, since it was clearly his fault that anything had occurred in the first place. Likes what? The day, the fine English spring day. He pressed his lips tight together as if fighting to hold back a chuckle at her expense. At once her senses cleared. She did not appreciate being the subject of a joke, even if she did deserve it. Of course he does. He's a dog. Dogs always enjoy a good romp on a nice day, especially on a fine English spring day. Now, if you will excuse us. She pursed her lips and let out a strong, shrill whistle. Samuel's ears perked, and he bounded toward her. Excellent. The stranger grinned in appreciation. I haven't heard such an outstanding whistle since my boyhood. Thank you. She raised her chin. I spent long days as a child perfecting it. It's a skill I cherish. As well you should. Samuel, come on, boy. The dog loped up beside her. She cast the stranger her best aloof gaze, the very one she'd been practicing for London, and smiled in the condescending manner she'd assumed used by the most fashionable ladies of society. If you will excuse me. Again the man looked as if he was barely stifling a laugh. My lady. He swept a deep bow, then straightened and clasped her hand, pulling it to his lips. His gaze caught and trapped hers, his eyes smoldered with amusement and something more. He turned her hand palm up and placed a kiss as light as a breath in the center. His gaze never broke from hers. She wondered why, at this very moment, she didn't simply melt into a small puddle and trickle away down the grassy hill. If you ever need my assistance again, even for so simple a matter as pulling you to your feet, I shall be at your service. Like your faithful Samuel, you need do little more. He grinned, and she thought her knees would buckle, then whistle. He dropped her hand, nodded, then turned and strode off in the direction of a neighboring estate. Her wits left with him. She could only stare in bemusement. Samuel nuzzled her hand, and absently she stroked his head. Goodness, she certainly was not at all used to such adventures, especially such improper adventures. Was this to be expected if one was overspirited? Is this what London would be like, full of rakes and rogues? There was no question this man was both. Why, men who weren't simply could not have shoulders that broad, or a stride that long, or a kiss that polished. It would, no doubt, be best not to mention this particular encounter to either her parents or Hugh. No, most definitely not to Hugh. Hugh would never understand the deep longings of a girl good and proper and biddable, a girl expected to make an excellent wife. She watched the stranger's figure grow small in the distance. Who was he? Not that it mattered, of course. She would never see him again. No, indeed. She turned and started toward home. She'd only wanted to know what it would be like to do something, to be something she wasn't in the first place, something she would never be. Why, he was almost incidental to the entire incident. An afterthought, nothing more. Even so, she glanced back over her shoulder, and a tiny part of her ached to find him completely out of sight. What an intriguing man, the kind of man a girl's dreams were made of. Her dreams. The thought drew her up short, and her stride faltered. No, not hers, of course, never hers. Not even dreams late, late in the night when the burden of goodness vanished into the dark and lovers danced together as one with only the stars to bear witness. Even in her own mind, the denial had a vague ring of falsehood about it. Come along, Samuel, let's go home. The dog trotted by her side, and she kept up a brisk pace, all in an effort to stop thoughts and emotions she did not particularly wish to examine. Thoughts and a lingering memory of a slightly lopsided smile, eyes the color of stormy skies, and a forbidden kiss that must last her a lifetime, a kiss she would only know just once. What I just read was set in 1818 England, Regency period. For young girls of this time period, there were very specific social rules. The London season was the big event, and it was to find a husband. That was the only purpose of it. My publisher was doing a series of books that had dogs in them. And when my editor mentioned this to me, I thought, oh, this is really goofy. And actually I said, oh, come on, you're doing books with dogs in them. And she goes, yeah. And so I realized right away it was probably her idea. 2 weeks later, I had an idea for a dog story. And it ended up to be Play It Again, Sam. It's, I researched breeds and came up with a bearded collie. It's a reincarnation story. So the first half is set in 1818, again, the Regency, my favorite period, and the second half is contemporary. It's tied together by this beardie, whose name is Sam, who is a big Humphrey Bogart fan, because in one of his lives he was, he belonged to a projectionist, so he was at the theater a lot, and the Bogart language and style just kind of stuck with him. This book was, it was fun to write because I had two stories that paralleled each other without being exactly the same. And I had in my contemporary heroine, who was the reincarnated soul of the historical heroine, she had learned things in this lifetime that she was now using. And it was wonderful to play with that whole idea. And then also, because it was reincarnation, and so, you know, these people have to die, I got to kill a heroine, and they never, ever let you kill heroines. It's just not done. I got to kill a heroine and casually shoot a dog, but not, I mean, he just got grazed, and he just really fainted, and fell in love with the dog. Got to research Humphrey Bogart movies. Oh, that was tough. You know, my kids would come in, well, you're not working, Mom, you're watching TV. No, sweetie, this is research. Leave Mommy alone. It was wonderful. It was a challenge, and it was kind of risky, too, seeing if I could pull it off. I don't start out with a theme, but I seem to evolve one through the course of the book. The book Believe ultimately had that theme in there of believing and trusting. It didn't start out that way, though. I think your mind is working on things like that, even though you're not consciously thinking of them. I'm trying to think what the theme in Play It Again, Sam would be, other than really kind of going with your heart and learning from your mistakes, which is probably a theme in life, too, but most of us don't do it. I keep in mind the audience for my books all the time. I feel that I'm writing for women who are exactly like me. The vast majority, there are all these statistics about who reads romance, and the majority of romance readers have some college education. Most of them work outside the home. I look at these statistics and I go, well, wait a minute, that's me. So that's who I'm writing for. If I don't enjoy a setting or a theme, I don't think anybody else is going to enjoy it. I do keep them in mind, and that's one reason why 20 years ago historical romance novels had big hulking hero, usually you know, taking the heroine by force. There are a lot of those old historical romances have rape in them. Today, I don't want to read that. I absolutely don't want to read that. Other women don't want to read that. What I want to read about is a heroine who, she might not be as big and strong as the hero, but she's every bit as smart. She is his equal in everything but physical strength. And that's what I want to read. That's what I think other women want to read. I don't want to read about simpering little heroines. Every now and then, you do need, because you're writing in a historical setting, you will have to use very young heroines. The one in this book is 18 in the first half of the book. But in the Regency era, 18 was an adult. I prefer to make my heroines, you know, mid to late 20s. My second book had a heroine who was in her 30s and had a grown daughter. And that was, I got good mail and bad mail on that one. I like making people cry. I really do. But then I like redeeming myself by making them laugh too. Readers will remember you and enjoy your work if you do that, if you make them laugh and make them cry, because you're pulling them in and you're involving them in the story and you're eliciting reaction, and they like that. The book that comes out this summer is called Believe, and it's a time travel to King Arthur's court. This is another risky book. My heroine in this one teaches, is roped into, essentially, she takes over in the middle of the semester teaching a class on legends and myths. She is an expert in Greek legends. And in fact, as the book starts, she's counting the weeks until summer break because she's going to Greece to finish researching a book she's doing. And it's really an excuse just to go to Greece. She doesn't like teaching this survey course on myths and legends because she's got to include things like the Arthurian legend, which she thinks is just a crock. And if it has a moral, it's don't trust your wife with your best friend. So naturally, she ends up traveling back through time to King Arthur's court, and it's Merlin who sends her back through time. I play around with the legend a lot. I did a lot of research on the Arthurian legends, and you can read 4 different books and find 4 different sets of details. I play around with it a lot. I make Arthur and Guinevere and Lancelot grown-ups. You know, they're all adults. She can see the Queen and Lancelot starting to be very friendly with each other and sees it as a case of a wife who isn't getting enough attention from her husband turning to a best friend. The hero is Galahad. Once I had set Galahad up at the hero, that's when, in terms of research, I found out he was known as the Virgin Knight, which is kind of a joke in the book because he doesn't turn out to be that way. This book was fun in that I got to make up my own reality. I got to have her contrast real life, what she was experiencing and seeing, with what she had always read and what was traditionally known and accepted and understood about the Arthurian legend. I'm going to change direction radically now and read you something from a book I wrote called The Emperor's New Clothes. This was my first and to date my only Western, although I had so much fun with it. I want to do another Western. I like Westerns. I like humorous Westerns. I like Maverick and that sort of thing. The Emperor's New Clothes, as I said, is a Western, and it's set in a town called Dead End, Wyoming, in the late 1880s. Ophelia Kendrake is the heroine. She is the daughter of a Shakespearean actor, and she needs money so she and her sister Jenny, who is 16, can settle down. They have been mistaken for a British countess touring the West and her maid. An old book of Jenny's, The Emperor's New Clothes, has given Ophelia the idea of selling her mythical title and her mythical estate, complete with a mythical castle, to the area's wealthiest citizen. That's Big Jack and Lorelei Matthews. However, their nephew Tyler is convinced she's a fake. Unfortunately for Tyler, he's already fallen in love with her, and he plans to reform her, but first he wants her to admit the truth to him. Now, Ophelia, there's a lot of me in my characters, and I don't dislike horses, I just don't know horses. Ophelia doesn't like horses. She thinks they're always laughing at her because they snicker. So in order to avoid riding a horse in the scene leading up to what I'm going to read now, she has thrown herself off the porch and claims to have an injured ankle. Tyler carried her up to her room, where they became extremely close, and she threatened him with a tiny little derringer that she kept. But at the point right before this, they have gotten extremely close again. Ophelia, Jenny's indignant voice sounded from the doorway. Instinctively, Ophelia and Ty sprang apart. The derringer jerked and fired. Ophelia stared in horror. "You shot me!" Ty's voice rose with disbelief. Blood oozed from the top of his shoulder. "Damnation, Ophelia, did you kill him?" Jenny cried. "Don't curse," Ophelia said without thinking, and winced at the red stain spreading across his shirt. "Of course I didn't kill him. If I'd killed him, he wouldn't be sitting up." "You almost killed me," he glared accusingly. "I did not, honestly. It's not even serious. If it was serious, it would be spurting. It's just sort of," she wrinkled her nose in disgust, "flowing. A trickle, really." "A trickle? It doesn't feel like a trickle. It feels," he paused dramatically, "fatal." "Well, it's not. It's a trickle, and it appears to be stopping at any rate." Now that the initial shock had passed, she realized he was scarcely hurt at all. "Here." She snatched up a towel from the washstand and tossed it at him. It slapped across his face, and he glared, clamping it on his wounded shoulder. "And look," she pointed to a small nick in the wall near the ceiling. "See, right there, that's where the bullet hit. It just grazed you." His mouth dropped open as if he couldn't believe her apparent disregard for his injury. "It hurts." "Are you sure you didn't seriously injure him?" Jenny said anxiously. "Of course she seriously injured me. She shot me. That's serious." Ty stared at Jenny. "Who in the hell are you?" "Who am I? Who are you? Who is he?" Jenny planted her hands on her hips and glared. "This is my maid, Jenny." Ophelia gestured at Jenny. "Oh," Ty brightened, "you're the one Zach was talking about." "Who is he?" Ophelia pulled her brows together. "He's one of the hands. Actually, he's lived here at the ranch since he was about 14 when his dad died." Ophelia stared in confusion. "I thought the Matthews raised you." "They really are nice people, you know," Jenny said to Ophelia. "We've established that. It's the best part," Ophelia said under her breath. "Do Big Jack and Lorelei take in all the homeless waifs in the area?" "Not really, just me and then Zach." Ty laughed, then cringed. "Ouch, I'm really in a great deal of pain. Are you going to do something about this?" "You must be Ty," Jenny smiled shyly. "I've heard a lot about you." "How do you know this Zach?" Ophelia scrambled off the bed. "I think I'm bleeding to death," Ty said, craning his neck to peer at his shoulder. Jenny shrugged. "He's teaching me to ride." "Yep," Ty heaved a heavy sigh. "I'm dying, all right." "A horse?" Ophelia gasped. "My life is flashing before my eyes," Ty said. "Of course a horse. What else?" Defiance colored Jenny's voice. "I'm getting weak," Ty groaned. "But horses, Jenny," Ophelia shook her head. "They're vile, nasty creatures, big and huge and always laughing." Ty pulled his brows together. "I've never heard them laugh." "Well, they do," Ophelia snapped. "I really don't think they laugh," Jenny said. "Nope, they definitely don't laugh. They're good and loyal beasts. For example," he stood and clasped his hand to his shoulder, "your horse would never shoot you." "She would if you were trying to seduce her," Ophelia glared. Jenny gasped. "He tried to seduce his horse?" "Not his horse," Ophelia released an irritated sigh. "Me." "But I don't understand, then why was the horse laughing?" Jenny shook her head as if to clear it. "Horses do not laugh," Ty's voice boomed through the room, "and I was not seducing you." "What would you call it?" "Well," Ty's gaze darted around the room as if looking for an answer. "All right, I was seducing you, but you weren't resisting." "I shot you?" Ophelia squared her shoulders. "I'd say that's resistance." He narrowed his eyes. "You said it was an accident." "My goodness, what's going on here?" Lorelei stood in the doorway, eyes wide, hand clasped to her cheek, shock coloring her face. At once, Ophelia realized how very odd the scene must look. She and Ty screaming at each other about laughing horses and seduction and... "Countess, I would suggest..." Lorelei nodded discreetly at the front of Ophelia's habit. "Ophelia," Jenny rolled her eyes toward the ceiling. Good Lord. Ophelia grabbed the edges of her blouse, pulled them together, and frantically tried to get the buttons in their tiny little holes. Damn. She had completely forgotten how horribly exposed she was when the gun went off. She glanced up to meet Ty's gaze. Surely the man was not amused by all this. "You must accept my apologies, Lorelei. I was..." "Don't give it a second thought, my dear." A weak smile touched Lorelei's lips, as if she really wanted to mean what she said, but couldn't quite manage. These things happen. Ty cast her a smug smile. "I'm glad to see you can walk." "I'm glad to see you're not dead," Ophelia said sharply. He snorted in disdain. "No thanks to you." Ophelia gritted her teeth. "It was an accident. However, given further consideration..." "Countess, Ophelia, Tyler..." Lorelei's voice snapped with the uncompromising tone of a mother chastising bickering children. "That is quite enough. Ophelia, you can continue to disrobe and get in bed. Whether you can walk or not, you took quite a tumble. I dare say you'll be stiff and in pain by evening. And as for you..." She stepped in front of Ophelia and turned her glare on Ty. "I can't imagine what you were thinking, forcing your attentions on a guest in my home. Such behavior indeed." "She shot me." His voice rang with indignation. "I probably would have shot you too," Lorelei said. "It was an accident," Ophelia said. "Why wouldn't the irritating man accept that?" "Ha, some accident. If I did it on purpose," Ophelia grinned at him from behind Lorelei, "you'd be dead." "Ophelia," Jenny clapped her hand over her mouth. Ty's gaze slid from Ophelia to Jenny and back. "So this is your maid?" "Yes," Ophelia said cautiously. "So why does she call you Ophelia?" Triumph flickered in his eyes. "It's her name," Jenny said helpfully. Ophelia groaned to herself. Why was it every time she turned around there was some annoying little detail that had completely slipped by her? She didn't recall the tailors having this much problem with the Emperor. She glared at Ty, a conceited smile plastered on his face. It's a good thing he didn't wear that look when she still had her gun in her hand. "Well," he prompted smugly. She should have killed him. "Well, she calls me Ophelia because..." Why? Of course, gad, she was good. "Because she has a speech difficulty and she cannot pronounce countess." "Poor little thing," Lorelei murmured. Ty laughed. "Oh, come now, do you really expect me to believe that?" "It's true." Ophelia turned to Jenny. "Say countess." Panic flashed through Jenny's eyes. Then she pulled herself up to her full, if tiny, stature and said, "See. "Very well." Ty clenched his teeth. "What about my lady?" Ophelia shrugged. "Jenny?" Jenny lifted her chin defiantly. "This is ridiculous," Ty snorted in disbelief. "You're telling me the only words this child can't say are countess and my lady?" "I have a problem with Bridgewater, too," Jenny said sweetly. "Aha!" Ty pointed at Jenny. "Caught you. You just said..." "That's quite enough." Lorelei glared at her nephew. "You have thoroughly embarrassed this child, and I refuse to let you continue. But..." "No buts, Tyler Matthews. You get right down to the kitchen and let Alma take a look at that little scrape of yours." Lorelei hustled him out of the room. "And Countess, you get some rest." He stopped in the doorway and glared at Ophelia over his shoulder. "You're lying to me again, and I still say you don't do it well." "Come along now, Tyler." Lorelei nudged him down the hall. "I do not lie," Ophelia said in a haughty manner, adding under her breath, "I act." "She shot me, you know," Ty's voice trailed after him. "I know, dear," Lorelei replied faintly. "You'll live."
Humor in romance novels is becoming more, not prevalent, but you're seeing it more and more often. Again, I write books that I want to read. I'm the same when I go to movies. Unless it's a truly, absolutely wonderful movie, I don't want to go to a movie that I'm going to cry at the end of. I want to go to a movie where I'm going to leave feeling good. You know, even if I know the ship's going to sink, it's got to be a really good movie. But I think there is more humor, and I've always had a lot of humor in my work. In Play It Again, Sam, I think there are places that make you cry, and then there are other places that make you laugh. The Emperor's New Clothes is strictly laughs all the way through. Humor is becoming more common. I think readers, from what I hear from readers, both what I hear directly and what I hear through online conversations and America Online and all those chat groups, people like humor. People always have liked humor. I don't know why, and I think it's an evolution too. You know, romance has gotten away from that, you know, the dominant male hero to a more equal male-female relationship, and humor goes along with that. Victoria Alexander is taken directly from my kids. I have a 9-year-old, soon to be 10-year-old son, Alex, and a 12-year-old daughter, Tori. When I started writing, when I sold my first book, I decided I wanted to use a pseudonym as opposed to my real name, strictly to separate fiction and nonfiction. I didn't want, as a news reporter, I didn't want my credibility questioned. I didn't want people I was interviewing thinking, well, she makes up stories, what's she going to do here? That didn't happen. In fact, 3 days after I sold my first book, I was interviewing Governor Nelson, and he had heard about it. And so the word was out immediately, but at that point it was already in the works. My real name is Sherry Griffin.